All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. It's great to be here with Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, and Minister of Forestry and Parks, Todd Loewen. Our province has never been a stranger to natural disasters or extreme weather. Hailstorms, tornadoes, droughts, fires, and floods are just a fact of life in Alberta. But beginning around the start of the last decade, we've experienced a string of disasters that have devastated communities and tested our resolve like never before. And in Alberta, the likelihood of floods and wildfires is highest between May and July. We don't need to look back very far to find several examples that tested Albertans, emergency response services, and governments at all levels. This includes the Slave Lake fire in May of 2011, the devastating floods in June of 2013, the Fort McMurray wildfire in May of 2016, and last year's record-setting wildfire season, which began very early in May. Each of these emergencies tested the limits of Alberta's emergency response infrastructure, and each time our emergency services have risen to the challenge. But we believe we can always do better, because when an emergency strikes, we need to be able to pull together quickly. We need to be able to ensure that no matter which region of the province is affected by an emergency, we are able to have an all-hands-on-deck approach. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes during an emergency, in addition to all the work and communication that happens in the public view. That's something that I believe premiers before me would agree on, as would mayors and reeves and councillors, because in addition to running the regular running of government, an emergency requires so many more resources and so much more dedicated time. When an emergency hits, intergovernmental and interagency communications skyrocket. Depending on the scale of the emergency, municipalities can quickly get overwhelmed, requiring them to ask the provincial government for assistance. In some cases, fire chiefs have asked the province to step in earlier to help manage wildfires. We've also seen emergency situations that have spanned multiple jurisdictions, which can make it more challenging to mount a coordinated and effective response. And we can't just sit back and wait until communities are damaged and people's homes and livelihoods are destroyed. We must be able to act sooner to protect the health and well-being of Albertans, including their families, their pets, and their livelihoods. I cannot overstress the importance of a strong, unified approach to tackling an emergency. We all remember the devastating wildfires of a year ago, but while communities have been rebuilding, we still need to consider what lessons have been learned and how we can make our government response even better. You'll recall the writ dropped and the election period began on May the 1st. Just 5 days later, severe wildfires forced me to activate the Emergency Management Cabinet Committee. And the following day, we declared a state of emergency. Over 45,000 Albertans were displaced from their homes, and candidates had to pause their campaigns to focus on the growing crisis. Running an election parallel to this crisis made a difficult situation more challenging. An election requires government to go into caretaker mode. The legislature is nearly fully emptied of staff, leaving behind just a skeleton crew. But there's still a cabinet in place, but there are restrictions on what ministers are able to do during this period. These restrictions are vital to preserving democracy and ensuring public trust in the electoral process, but they make it incredibly difficult to respond to emergencies. For example, Minister Ellis, Minister Loewen, and I were responsible for leading Alberta through this crisis, yet none of us had access to government devices or computers. No one else in cabinet did either. The situation required us to make some pretty big decisions, like finding a way to help members of the East Prairie Métis settlement who lost homes and didn't qualify for insurance, or matching funds from the Red Cross, or signing off on financial assistance for the 45,000 plus wildfire evacuees. The caretaker period made it harder to act on behalf of Albertans during this emergency. And of course, there was also an election going on, complete with all the usual activity that we expect from an election contest. It was bizarre for ministers to have to, and other candidates to have to go through these motions while so much of Alberta was burning and so many Albertans were out of their homes. I remember having a conversation with Minister Ellis and Minister Loewen saying that technically Elections Alberta said that we were at odds with the Elections Act, and using government resources during a campaign period could subject us to $5,000 daily fines. So I had to get their buy-in on making sure that they were okay with having to pay that should it be levied against us. But we were in the middle of an emergency, and we had to make sure that we were able to collaborate with municipal, provincial, and federal governments. So we went ahead. I also found myself answering questions about the election at wildfire briefings, as well as questions about wildfires at campaign events. I also had to reach out, of course, to the member across the aisle to make sure that she was fully briefed, as well as to visit a center with her to understand the nature of the evacuation. That is, this whole scenario is not the best way to try to exchange vital information during a crisis. Elections Alberta scrambled to set up new polling stations to make sure every displaced Albertan was able to vote. Albertans and members of the media called for us to suspend the election. And we made it through, but I can tell you one thing: I don't think any minister or MLA or candidate or premier, for that matter, would willingly repeat this experience. Albertans need their government's undivided attention during an emergency, and this extends into a potential transitional period for government too. In the midst of an emergency, the last thing Albertans need is a government that is distracted by external processes, including cabinet's election transition and briefing up. Emergencies will happen in the future. Facing them again is a virtual certainty, but we can be better prepared for them when they come. So with that, we've got a number of ministers able to answer your questions today, but I would like to invite Minister Mike Ellis forward to discuss the particulars of his legislation.
Thank you very much, Premier. Well, thank you again, Premier, and of course, colleagues, for being here. We know all too well the devastation, uncertainty, and upheaval that disasters and public emergencies can bring. Last year, we experienced one of the worst hazard seasons Alberta has ever seen, and this year we're already seeing fire activity. As Premier Smith mentioned, it's imperative Alberta's government has the necessary tools in place to respond swiftly and effectively. This is why the proposed Emergency Statutes Amendment Act 2024 is crucial. I'll now speak about the proposed amendments to the Emergency Management Act, to the Forest and Prairie Protection Act and the Water Act, and of course the Election Act, and more detailed questions. We have all the ministers here that are prepared to answer those questions. So first amendments to the Emergency Management Act is about the government's ability to assume control of a local response during a state of local emergency. Alberta uses a decentralized emergency management system that begins with local authorities in recognition of the incident management, In response the response is best led by local municipalities which are closest to that situation. But sometimes, in very extreme circumstances, the government must act and provide more direct support. So currently, the law isn't very clear on how the government could assume control of a local response. Alberta's government will keep Albertans safe by ensuring communities are prepared for emergencies. Local jurisdictions have different emergency response capabilities and therefore may require unique levels of support from Alberta's government. Amendments to the Emergency Management Act will provide clear mechanisms for the Alberta government to intervene and provide the unique and appropriate level of response to manage the emergency from a local authority. As we saw last year, disasters are becoming more severe and more complex and can rapidly jump across multiple jurisdictions. It's crucial for the government to be able to respond quickly to better protect the lives of Albertans and the communities where they live. I want to be clear, the local authorities will continue to be responsible for emergency planning and emergency response in their jurisdictions unless the government decides there is a need to take over a local response. And the government would only assume control of a local response in circumstances where there is an obvious need for additional provincial oversight and support. Additionally, we're proposing amendments to the Act that will require local authorities to report specific types of information to the province during the state of local emergency. This will ensure lines of communication remain open so that the province can provide the adequate support. This is no different than a briefing note in any sort of command structure throughout any sort of command situation. Proposed amendments to the Forest and Prairie Protection Act will help modernize our provincial wildfire response by providing Alberta's government clear authority to step in and support or potentially lead response efforts when large or multi-jurisdictional wildfires occur. Also, they will provide the province the authority to construct fire guards, possibly remove buildings or structures in rare emergency situations when these actions are required for wildfire suppression efforts. These amendments will allow Alberta's government to work more effectively alongside municipalities and Métis settlements when it comes to wildfire response. And Alberta's government is also proposing changes to the Water Act because in emergencies, every second counts. The changes, if passed, improve our ability to respond quickly in a water emergency such as drought or flood. These changes would help make sure that water is readily available for public health and safety, as well as secondary priorities of livestock welfare, critical infrastructure, and critical environmental needs. The proposed amendments would also streamline processes when an emergency is declared to allow emergency officials to take key actions to protect homes, livelihoods during a water emergency. Also, the proposed changes would allow government to determine the priority of water use. The spring and summer months bring a heightened risk of wildfires, droughts, and floods, and posing significant threats to both lives and livelihoods. Our experience also shows us that the spring and summer are vulnerable periods in Alberta, and that spring is a very difficult time to hold a provincial election, as the Premier mentioned. Therefore, we have also proposed to amend the Elections Act to change the election date. Moving the provincial election date from May to October lessens the likelihood of a provincial election coinciding with a natural disaster such as a fire or a flood. In recent years, we witnessed the devastating impact of natural disasters on the communities and our province. And in 2023, severe wildfires were occurring at the same time as the provincial election. The spring and summer months bring with them a heightened risk of wildfires, droughts, and floods, posing significant threats to both lives and livelihoods. Our experience shows us that the spring and summer are vulnerable periods in Alberta, and that the spring is not the best time to hold a provincial election. Therefore, we've proposed to amend the Elections Act to change the election date. If passed, this would change the date of the next provincial election, which is currently scheduled for May 31st, 2027 to October 18th of 2027. Moving the provincial election from May to October lessens the likelihood of a provincial election coinciding with a natural disaster, such as a fire or flood. In addition to bring the sensible solution, this change would also bring us in line with other provinces. The majority of Canadian jurisdictions conduct their provincial elections in October. Changing the set election date in Elections Act also means that we are going to need making changes to the Alberta Senate Election Act and the Elections Finances Contributions Disclosure Act. The Senate Elections Act will amend to adjust the time frame for authorizing a Senate election when it coincides with the provincial election, and also the amendment is also required to the Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act to adjust the election advertising period that applies to third-party advertisers to align with the proposed new set election date. These changes flow directly from adopting a new set or election date. So in closing, I want Albertans to know that we have a very strong emergency management framework in place. We are well prepared to deal with emergencies, big or small. The proposed changes we are announcing today are a proactive measure to strengthen Alberta's response to emergencies and disasters. And with these changes, we are focused on making sure that we are able to work towards the common goal of safety and security for Albertans. With that, I will conclude and we will go to questions.
Thank you, Minister. And just a reminder for those on the line and in the room, this press conference is under embargo until the legislation is tabled. And with that, we'll go with one question, one follow-up, starting here in the room before making our way to the phones. First at the mic.
Sheila Anskalski with CTV News in Edmonton. My questions is for the Premier. Was there any consultation with municipalities regarding the specific aspect of the legislation that would give the province new powers to take over from local authorities during an emergency? And if not, why?
Well, I can tell you that there's lots of different ways to consult, and I can also tell you that we've been hearing from municipalities about this for some time. I'll just quote a story written by CTV a couple of weeks ago. Alberta municipalities say the province has been slow to react to calls for more firefighting support and long-term plan to better protect communities outside the forest protection area. This area, which covers about half the province, is considered by the Alberta government jurisdiction, but communities such as Parkland County and parts of Brazeau and Yellowhead counties all fall outside this zone. They're all hit by wildfires in 2026. Or 2023, early on in the fire, we phoned and the province said we said that it was out of control. We need help. They didn't get the resources they said that they needed to. A couple hours later, it was getting really out of control. We asked for air support. We were told no because they were too busy fighting fires elsewhere. Vice President of the Rural Municipalities Association is the person who was quoted there. In November, the association passed a resolution to engage with the province on a long-term strategy to tackle wildfires outside the forest protection area. The Parklands Fire Chief is calling for the province to provide better training, and the fire chiefs have also asked for us to be more proactive. So, like, there's some things that have become so obvious because you've been through them over and over and over again. Everybody's come to the same conclusion that we can't sit back and wait for a fire to jump into the border and burn down Slave Lake or burn down Fort McMurray or potentially burn down Drayton Valley. And so I would say that we listened, we heard, we're reacting. We're in the middle of fire season again, and we have to make sure that we are prepared for us to deal with not only fires, but potentially flood and potentially as well the issue of drought. So we believe that we heard loud and clear, and I hope that municipalities understand that we value their input.
I guess just following up on that, relations between the province and municipalities right now, I think it's fair to say they are a bit tense, specifically in light of recent legislation, Bills 18 and 20. Given that you're saying that you heard from them, you analyzed what you believed you heard, but didn't directly consult on that specific aspect of the legislation, are you at all concerned that giving your province more powers over municipalities could further erode those relations between your government?
Let's quote another news story that points out that we have 116 Alberta government consultations going on right now of 192. And out on the street, if you ask people if they know about any of them, they say no. And Lori Williams says, well, that's unfortunate because normally our consultation skews towards special interest groups. So look, guys, there's lots of ways to consult. And we do formal consultations in some cases. We do public consultations in some cases. We listen to resolutions in some cases. We meet one-on-one with stakeholders. We meet one-on-one with people who come into our office. We listen to the public. We get letters. We get emails. Sometimes things are so obvious that you have to act. And that is what I would say in this case. This is so obvious that we have to make these changes. We're making them.
So these are lessons learned. This is lessons learned from the last fire season through feedback that both Minister Lowen and I have received from affected municipalities, from affected fire chiefs. This is part of the reason why we have the reporting structure that is in place. I do, and so does Minister Lowen, we as the province have the ability right now to go in and take over a situation. That is not what we want to do. It's in fact, quite frankly, the complete opposite, which is why we have these briefing notes in reporting structure. So when there is a level 1 incident that takes place, the municipality will let us know if it starts to move beyond their capabilities and we need to move into a level 2 or a level 3 or possibly even a level 4. There's an actual process that is in place, and it becomes very much a proactive measure that we are taking. And again, this is the feedback that we received from affected municipalities as well as affected fire chiefs who were in these critical incidents from last year.
A question for the Premier. Regarding the date change, I know that Elections Alberta has been telegraphing for a while on its webpage there could be a change in the date because of the wildfire season getting earlier and earlier. And you said yourself that we're seeing more extreme weather events more recently, the last decade. But you talk about wildfires, it could be more human activity, it could be, you've suggested maybe arson, things like that. These fires are massive, not just here, but across the country. But you don't mention climate change. That's a term I don't see you mentioning. Will you acknowledge, we've been down this road before, will you acknowledge that climate change is driving this? Or why don't you mention climate change as being a major factor, according to experts, driving this?
Yes, of course we have to be concerned about climate change, but I can also tell you, Graham, that of all of the fires so far this year, and we've had about the same as last year, all but one were human caused. So we have to be responsible and send the message to the community. They've got to be careful. They've got to make sure that if they inadvertently set a fire, that people are being called in. That they have to be careful when it's dry. They have to be careful when they have campfires. They have to be careful when they're using equipment. They have to be careful when they're burning garbage. We can have a dual message because it's vitally important that people understand both our causes.
And on that date change again, an issue that was raised yesterday in the House was the Electoral Boundaries Commission. it's an issue that people aren't really talking about right now, but the clock starts ticking this October 31st to get a commission in place. You get 2 years to do that. Will you commit to getting something done in time for the next election to change the boundaries in Alberta to reflect the changing population?
100%. I mean, we have to do it. I've gone through this before. We had to do an electoral boundary change when I was in opposition, so I understand the process that we have to go through. Our intention would be to have the commission struck. We have a chief electoral officer that we have to get into place first. We want to make sure that is done to be able to ensure we've got seamless preparation. But our intention would be to have it completed by the end of 2025, which should give lots of opportunity for everybody to get prepared, because you have to reestablish your constituency associations, bank accounts, and make sure that that you've got that alignment. If there's going to be new nominations, people will want to get underway with that. So yes, I can commit to that.
Hi, Brianna Carson-Smith with Global Edmonton. Premier, in the documents given to the media, one of the reasons for why this is being introduced is that this authority would be only assumed in extreme cases, including where local actions are at cross purposes with broader regional or provincial actions. I have a hard time understanding when a municipality might be at crossroads with a province during a natural disaster. Do you have an example of when this has happened in the past?
Sure. I mean, I think I have a good example of something that worked really well. And it was when we were seeing massive fires in Brazeau County, and they were doing a tremendous job of being able to manage that within the county. But it was very quickly heading to Drayton Valley. And it's not Brazeau County's job to do structural firefighting in Drayton Valley. And so there's an interface that happens when you've got fires that are encroaching on the border of a municipality. That by definition is our job to step in. And what happened was that a company called Fire and Flood stepped in, set up a wall of water to match the wall of fire. And I believe that that was essential in preventing the fire from jumping into the border. And so it was our emergency management agency that was able to step in and be able to direct that. Could we have done it sooner so that it didn't get as close to the town? Maybe. If we'd had the authority to step in and not have to wait till the last minute, then perhaps it could have been done sooner. There were other instances as well where any time a fire threatens another encroachment on another jurisdiction, that's when we believe it's the provincial's job to be proactive and step in. The other issue that we had was that for some reason, the way the Act is written, even though Todd is responsible for all Crown land, and that includes Crown grazing land in southern Alberta, for some reason, we don't have the authority to step in first when it's going cross jurisdiction. You can recall from a few years ago, the Waterton fire blazed through, I think it started in the park and then blazed through multiple jurisdictions. And the weird way the Act is written is that we have to demonstrate complete meltdown or complete failure on the part of the local firefighting agencies to step in. And that doesn't seem appropriate, because a lot of those local firefighting agencies, we can work in partnership and mutual aid agreements. So what this does is it gives the Minister of Forestry and Parks direct line of sight over all the Crown land that he was responsible for, whether it's in a forested area or whether it's in a grasslands area. And that was a missing piece.
I appreciate the examples. And just to clarify, I was asking about when their actions are at cross purposes. It sounds like in those circumstances, they would be in agreement that more help is needed, but it specifically says when their actions are at cross purposes.
I don't know if you want to comment on that, Todd?
Yeah. Yeah, when it comes to cross purposes, we know that there's different levels of fire activity on the landscape, and when we're fighting wildfire, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and we need to have clarity on who's making the decisions and when those decisions are made, because those decisions can affect people's lives and affect their lives themselves. So again, we just want to make sure that alignment is there. That this isn't anything new as far as the ability to do these things, but now we're setting out clear processes in place so that everybody knows at what stage and we can be at based on the activity of the fire in the landscape.
And then my follow-up for the Premier from Calgary on the Green Line letter that was just sent. It apparently says any cost increases or escalations will be the responsibility of the city, and no additional funding will be available for this project under any circumstances. My colleagues would like to know, why is this, and what does this mean for the current funding already allocated?
Well, look, I've been very clear. I thought they made a mistake in the tunneling project. That is the most expensive part of the project. We told them, I think there's been this ad hoc citizens group that has been raising the alarm about this since 2021. I have a letter that was written in 2021 saying that tunneling is estimated to cost on a per kilometer basis at least 4 times as much as surface and elevated track. It says that, and it's that area that's going down to Eau Claire, and the alternative, an elevated line from the event center to City Hall hub would avoid the costly tunnels, would only cost $200 million, which would save about $1.8 billion. So if I know that, they know that, their administration knows that, and yet they decided to go ahead anyway. And when Minister McIver, who was the minister at the time, let them know that we expected it would be a major cost escalation, they said, don't worry, we got this. And he told them, okay, you got this, you're on your own if there are cost escalations. So no one can be surprised. And so what we're telling them is, we're happy to support LRT. We're happy to support transit projects, but if it needs to be rescoped so that they can do it within their budget, then we would expect them to do that. So no, we're not giving any additional dollars.
Hi there, Julia Wong, CBC News. We've heard how these powers to assume control over local emergencies would only be used when there's an obvious need for additional oversight. But I'm curious whether there are any safeguards that have been set up or will be set up to prevent abuse of this, because what might seem obvious to the province may not seem obvious or reasonable perhaps to a municipality.
Look, there are many municipalities who have the capacity to manage their own fires and floods. I would say that Calgary has a very sophisticated emergency response. Edmonton is a very sophisticated emergency response. I think because of all of the calamities that have happened in Fort McMurray and the remoteness of it, they have developed a sophisticated response. But we've got 355 municipalities. Many of them are tiny. Many of them just simply don't have the kind of firefighting resources that we have. And when a fire generates in the wildfire area, that is a provincial jurisdiction, and we certainly can't allow for small hamlets and small towns to be at risk, nor can we be demanding of their neighbors that they take on an extremely costly firefighting response that might be outside of their jurisdiction. So look, we have no interest in getting into firefighting in areas that are completely under control within the boundaries and borders of an individual municipality, and they can manage it. But as soon as it threatens to go cross-border or threatens to rage out of control, then we have to be prepared to step in. And these are the kinds of decisions that have to happen quickly. You don't have the luxury of waiting 24 or 48 or 72 hours when the wind changes. You have to be able to act quickly. And so I can't foresee that there's going to be very many municipalities who are going to oppose this move. In fact, we've been hearing the opposite, that when we've had these major catastrophes in the past, whenever the postmortem is done, it's always, why didn't the province step in earlier? Why wasn't the province proactive? Why didn't they take the steps? And so if that happens time and time and time again, you've got to start listening. And that's what we're doing. We're listening and we're responding to that.
And this is more so a clarification. So what I'm hearing you say is no, there are no safeguards. Is that correct?
What I'm hearing is that, what I'm saying is that I can't foresee a hypothetical situation like you're describing. So what I would foresee is that most municipalities will be delighted that the province has said, hey, we're here to help. We're not going to let you hang out there on your own. Do you want to go?
Yeah. I don't think you're understanding. We have the ability right now, without this bill, to go in and take over a critical incident, as an example. And what we are doing is putting the safeguards in place. This is what the reporting structure is. This is what the levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 are there, is so that when things start to drastically take a turn for the worse, and as the Premier mentioned, we're talking about hamlets and villages and stuff like that, if the fire or a potential fire is beyond their capabilities, then the province, through that proper reporting structure, will be able to come in and effectively take over control. And as the Premier has stated, I think as I have stated before, I think the public believes that we are in control, and they ask us to take control of these situations when they start to get out of hand, or they question us why we were not there earlier, as an example. So we are putting the proper mechanisms in place so that in a critical incident, we are monitoring the situation to the point where if they reach a certain level and a criteria that Minister Lowen has, then we will take control over that situation. So it's, quite frankly, the opposite of what you're insinuating.
And my follow-up is, this just seems to be, and this is for the Premier, this just seems to be another example, another pattern of the province assuming more power. So for example, Bill 20 and removing councillors and changing bylaws, Bill 18 requiring provincial approval for federal funding. How do you explain this pattern?
Emergencies, public safety are provincial responsibility, full stop. And it's our job to make sure that every community member is safe, and it's our job to make sure that when there's a natural disaster of major proportions, that that we're there and people understand that we're there. So I just disagree.
Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. So when you're talking about stepping in to help out outside of the forest protection area, or even in the cases where municipalities may be overwhelmed and their resources aren't enough, are you going to increase funding for either your own provincial firefighters or the municipal firefighters so they have more resources so you don't have to step in?
Well, I can get John to talk about the resourcing that we've already done because it's been substantial, and we're going to continue to do more resourcing. And that I think is really the important part, is that we have the ability to do night vision helicopters. We have the ability to have an army of 500 wildfire fighters. We have the ability to tap into federal firefighting and international firefighting resources. We have the ability to buy water bombers. A tiny hamlet doesn't. A tiny city doesn't. A tiny municipality doesn't. So I would say that municipalities should know that with the investment that they make in their local firefighting efforts, having us able to step in is just going to be able to accelerate the ability to deal with fires faster. So yes, we've already invested, and we're going to invest a lot more. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, so this year we added the extra $55 million. That allowed us to hire more wildfire fighters. It allowed us to add 2 additional night vision helicopters so we now have 3. It allowed us to add more air tankers onto the ground too. And so this has all improved our ability to respond to wildfire across the province and be able to help municipalities with their fight against wildfire too. I was at the Slave Lake base here just last week. I was able to see our Dash 8 air tankers that we brought on. They're the envy of North America, is because they could fly so fast to different parts of the province. If they're based in Slave Lake, they can be to any part of the province in 1 hour. And I think actually Waterton was 1 hour and 3 minutes. So that was the furthest point that they would go. So I think when we look at the reaction that we've had, I think municipalities, I think they want to have access to these facilities. And then kind of going back to the consultation, I done some town halls in some of the areas that were affected by wildfire. And listening to the people there, one of their biggest concerns was, why can't you guys step in sooner? Why can't you help? And I think this is all about clarity, because we already have the authority to do this, but this provides clarity to the municipality so that they know at what the different levels that the fire will get to, and what the criteria are for us to step in. So I think that's very important. Again, this is about clarity. This isn't about taking over or trying to control municipalities. They still have the right to be there, and we still respect that.
Okay. And on a different topic, on the change of the election date, it's an extra 5 months in office, so I'm wondering why October 2027 instead of October 2026?
Well, it's an extra 4.5 months, and that would have been 7.5 months fewer if you'd gone the other way. So that would be one reason. But October seems to have stood the test of time for municipalities. When you look at the ways in which first it was a fixed election window, and I think part of that was because of trying to manage around weather, trying to manage around a couple of holidays. And now, of course, if you look at, we've got winter here, November through to April, most years. May is fire season, June is flood season, July and August is wedding and and travel season. So then you're left with sort of September or October. And September, people are just getting back into school. So it just seemed like the obvious choice by process of elimination. Just made sense to align it with when people have come to expect elections, which is the 3rd week of October.
Thank you. We're going to go to the phones for a couple questions before trying to get back here in the room. Operator, can you put through the first caller, please?
Don Braid, Calgary Herald.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Just quickly on the preparedness and the government's role here, and then I have a follow on something else entirely. This is going to be expensive, and it probably requires a lot more provincial staff. An AUP union official, you might have noticed, has said the government's not even ready for this year because a lot of last year's fire crews aren't coming back. What kind of staffing up and spending are you expecting just to get yourselves ready to jump in at any point in one of these things, or is it less serious than that? Please explain.
Well, we're going to continue preparing as we do. It's really just a matter of coordinating with the municipalities. Every municipality still needs to have their own local firefighting team because there are localized grass fires, there's structural fires. So that isn't going to change. I would anticipate that as our cities continue to grow, municipalities are going to continue to invest in firefighting. I think our role is, and we've been asked this as well by the structural firefighters, is there a way for them to be cross-trained so that when we do get into wildfire season, that we would be able to call them out and deploy them? Because it does happen anyway. It is a different type of firefighting altogether, and we did experiment with some of that last year. We also experimented with volunteer firefighters as well as Indigenous firefighters. But really, this is a coordination role to make sure that we're using every aspect of the emergency system in the case of the biggest fires. I should also mention we discovered last year that the PPCLI has 300 trained firefighters in the Canadian Armed Forces, and so that was good information to have. So I don't want you to think that we're going to have a permanent force of tens of thousands of firefighters ready to leap into action in every municipality in every situation to put out every fire. That's not what this is about. This is when we have these major disasters and catastrophes that occur, and they seem to be occurring on a regular basis, that have the potential to jump cross-border. We believe that we have a role in helping to coordinate between jurisdictions. So I'll turn it over to Todd so he can tell you a little bit more about how we're sourcing up.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. But yeah, we do have our recruitment process this year has been actually very good. We've had more response than we've ever had in the past. Pardon me, to our call out for firefighters to step forward. We actually have a new program where members of the public can join in too, and receive a little bit of training and a little bit of opportunity to be able to help out in times of need. When it comes to our staffing levels, we're way ahead of last year. As we've said in the past, we started making sure we had boots on the ground ready to go earlier this year, 2 weeks earlier than in the past. We have additional firefighters that we've hired due to our budget 2024. And so those folks are we're going through the final stages of some of the training for some of them now. But again, we're way ahead of last year. The staffing levels are good. The response to our call out for firefighters has been phenomenal. In fact, probably the best we've ever had. So again, I hear some of these concerns or some of these thoughts expressed in the media about our situation, and I can assure you that we're in good standard right now as far as having our crews ready and trained and having a higher number than we've ever had in the past. So thank you.
That happens every year.
Yeah, so one of our main sources of firefighters is our students, because their time off during the summer lines up with our busiest time of the fire season. So in the fall, a lot of our students go back into the classroom. But we have our fire attack crews that continue through, and this past year we had firefighters fighting all through the winter. And so that we're prepared for that. And as we come into the spring, when the students come out of school, that's when we have them getting their training and getting them ready to hit the ground running in wildfire season that we have now.
And your follow-up, Don?
Oh yes, and we haven't talked about water. And there seems to be a couple things in there very significant. One of them is about the province being able to take over interbasin water transfers. And water, when it's scarce, is a very political matter and can be very emotional. And I'm just wondering how you can ensure that any such transfers, when you take water from one place and send it to another, are going to be handled in a completely nonpartisan and fair way.
Well, look, I mean, this is one where we're doing extensive consultations on it. The minister has established a committee, a number of different committees actually, to begin this discussion. And we know, as you say, that every area would have to make sure that their water needs were met first. And so we know that it's been complicated to have this conversation. One of the other consultations the minister is doing is on used water, because we have a lot of industrial water that is already being reused. And if we can move that, to places where it can be used for fracking or industrial use or irrigation after it's been cleaned up. Those are things that we need to have a conversation about. I think we're seeing that there's a lot of construction and industrial development happening in southern Alberta. A couple of our basins are constrained. There are other places in Alberta where we're not constrained because of water. And so we've begun the consultation. No decisions have been made, but we hope that people will engage in a robust discussion about it. Let me hand it over to Minister Schultz so she can tell you a little more.
Yes, the Premier is exactly correct. So when it comes to the bigger question of interbasin transfer, and this is something that has come up a lot since we've been having the conversations about drought and set up our water advisory panel, if we're talking about large-scale interbasin transfer, I absolutely commit to you that that larger, broader engagement absolutely has to happen to address concerns, I would say, of municipalities, also to ensure the safety and well-being and health of our aquatic species. However, in this specific case, what this change allows us to do is enable or approve a low-risk water interbasin transfer for the purposes of providing drinking water to a municipality, for example. So in the past, this has happened about, I believe it is 6 times in the past. That requires a special decision by the legislature. The change that we're making is for Cabinet to be able to make that decision if we do need it in an urgent or emergency situation. So that would be if we are in a stage 5 water emergency. Again, that has never happened in the history of our province. It's why we set up the water sharing agreements, because we surely hope that we don't have to get there. Again, the changes that we are making from an environment and water perspective in this piece of legislation is really about making sure that we can prioritize human health and safety if we do find ourselves in a drought emergency, and that is the very specific change we're making here. But you're exactly right. If we're talking about the larger scale interbasin transfers, and that's something that I have been asked to look at from a variety of different sectors for a variety of different reasons, and whether that be through our Water Advisory Committee or the Oil Sands Mine Water Committee that we've pulled together this week, those are exactly some of the things that they're going to be looking at and that we're going to need more consultation on.
Thank you, Minister. And we have time for 1 or maybe 2 more questions. Operator, could you put through the next caller, please?
Alexander Dwellywall, Rebel News.
Thank you for taking my questions, Premier and fellow ministers. I'd like to begin by first asking, so when communicating pertinent information to residents on states of local emergency, does the meta ban on Canadian news pose a roadblock to disseminating that information? And if so, how will your government overcome that this wildfire season?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, because I've been in broadcast media before, is there's kind of a whole all hands on deck approach when emergencies hit, that television and radio are seen to be the primary sources of that kind of news. And often what you'll find is that news entities will turn over all their coverage to make sure that people have the information that they need. We also, from our perspective, when we have a major disaster, we make our officials available on sometimes a daily basis to be able to give updates, sometimes more frequently. We also do situation reports so that we're able to give information that way. And we've also done telephone town halls for affected communities. So we have a number of different mechanisms to get our message out. But I wouldn't anticipate that in the case of an emergency that there would be any barriers. Did you want more?
The only thing I'd add is, of course, we have our emergency alert system as well, right? And I think that's important for everybody to know that.
Yeah. And it worked this year. You saw the integration with the federal and provincial test. You didn't get eight alerts this year. I hope. Follow up?
Alex, were you there?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So according to several accosted budgetary documents and media reports, a series of NDP and UCP government cutbacks under the previous administration, according to some, hindered the province's ability to prevent and respond to wildfires. Cuts in particular impacted Alberta's elite aerial firefighting team, reduced staff at dozens of wildfire lookout towers, and decommissioned dozens more. Premier and fellow ministers, will your government commit to reversing those cuts?
I'll let Minister Lowen talk about some of those specific cuts, but there's a couple things I want to say first. So one thing I would say is that it's part of the reason why we increased our contingency to $2 billion this year. It was $1.5 billion last year, is that we want people to know the first call on that is emergencies. And we're prepared to pay up to that amount if we need to, and more. I mean, last year we had to find additional resources. There will never be an emergency where Albertans have to worry that, oh, sorry, we're out of money, we can't come and help. That just simply wouldn't happen. And I can tell you that the federal government is it walks with us on that as well, that if we need to have federal support, it's there also. So that would just be one thing I would say by way of context. I should also mention, because I don't think Minister Lowen does enough to brag about the work that he's done in his ministry, but he is really changing the way forest fire fighting is done in our province. The maybe the implications of what he's described with the night vision helicopters isn't fully understood, but it allows our firefighters to go up at night, find the hot spots, put fire suppressant on them, and then we send out a team to do the digging and dousing, which is one of the ways that you can get fires doused, is you work with the weather, you work with the evening, and so you work with the temperature, and it has been incredibly effective. So he gave us an update a couple of years ago, or a couple of days ago, pardon me, where we had the same number of fires by about mid last week as we had last year, but they hadn't raged into being out of control. And part of it is the new firefighting techniques that he's using. So sometimes what you do is you use different types of equipment to get a different response. And so I would say that the proof will be, as we go through the fire season, in the new techniques that the minister is employing. But I'll turn it over to him to talk about some of the older techniques that previous governments have ended up expiring.
Yes, thanks, Premier, and thanks for the question. Yeah, when we look at the funding this year, we added the $55 million for upfront. Moving into this fire season, it's allowed us to do a lot of good things, like hiring additional firefighters. It's allowed us to get the extra air tankers. It's allowed us to extend our crew contracts so that we can start earlier and work later into the fire season because of that. Because we've noticed that the fire seasons have extended on both ends. Pardon me. So that funding's been done. When I was at Slave Lake the other day, and I was able to talk to some of the helitack crews there, and using one of our night vision helicopters, there was a fire that started a fair ways away, and they were able to load up crews into that night vision helicopter, go over to that fire, circle around it, analyze it, decide where to drop the crews. The crews were able to get in with their chainsaws and basically roughly contain the fire. And they were able to still get back. And without that night vision helicopter, they would have been able to only analyze the fire and then leave and then come back in the morning. But because of that ability, they were able to contain that fire, and they sent in crews in the morning to finish it up. And so that was actually a very practical example of how the night vision crews have, the night vision helicopters that we have. And I believe we're the only jurisdiction in Canada that has night vision helicopters that are working fighting wildfire. So we're ahead of the game. Again, I talked about the Dash 8 planes that we have that can access the whole province within an hour. And again, that's the envy of North America right now. The jurisdictions around the world are calling us and asking about how that's been working. So again, the response has been great, and the new technology we have has been very helpful. Oh, yes, and in addition, we did use drones last year, and we've increased the number of drones we have available to us too. What drones allow us to do is to be able to fly when manned aircraft aren't allowed to fly. And they can also fly at night, and they can do thermal imaging on fires. So we can track the fire behavior through the night. And so when our crews start in the morning, they know exactly where to go and what the fire's done. So that's been an extreme amount of help to us too. We have good companies right here in Alberta that are working on technology that's incredible when it comes to that drone technology.
Thank you, Minister. And that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And a reminder, this press conference is under embargo until the legislation is tabled.
Yeah.